what's the dream?
I'm trying to be a professional singer.
When dreams are made and used.
Susan Boyle hasn't performed live in 6 years. After her stroke in 2022, most people assumed her career was over. Doctors warned her the damage might be permanent. The left side of her face wouldn't move. Her voice came out broken and weak. But in February 2026, music Simon Cowell made an announcement. He wants Susan back for the biggest Britain's Got Talent season ever. The question is whether she can actually music do it. What happened in those 4 years between her hospital bed and that recording studio? The answer involves £50,000, 5-hour daily sessions, and one promise she made to herself. Susan Magdalene Boyle was born on April 1, 1961 in Blackburn, West Lothian, Scotland. The youngest of 9 children in a small, crowded house filled with noise and faith. Her mother, Bridget, was 47 when she became pregnant again, and doctors warned her that carrying the baby could cost her life. They advised her to end the pregnancy because the risks were high and frightening. But Bridget was a devoted Roman Catholic and she refused. She chose to continue. When the time came, things went wrong. Susan had to be delivered by emergency surgery after serious complications. For a short moment, she was deprived of oxygen. She was tiny. She struggled to breathe. She was placed in an incubator while her parents waited in fear. Doctors told the family that the baby would never be anything music special. Those words hung in the air. They stayed there for years. And without knowing it, Susan began living a life that would slowly prove them wrong. Because of the oxygen issues during birth, doctors made a mistake that shaped her entire childhood. They told her parents that she had brain damage. In the 1960s, there were not many tools to question such claims. So, the label stuck. It followed her into school, into classrooms, into conversations whispered behind her back. She had mood swings and moments of frustration, and instead of asking deeper questions, people blamed the diagnosis. Susan felt the weight of it even as a child. She later said she always knew the label did not feel right. But her father Patrick passed away in 1997 at age 81, and her mother Bridget died in 2007 at 91, never knowing the truth. It was not until 2012, when Susan was 51, that a specialist told her she had Asperger's syndrome, not brain damage. For more than 5 decades, she had carried a misunderstanding that shaped how the world saw her. School was not kind to her. Children called her Susie Simple. They laughed music at her learning struggles. They pushed her aside. The teasing did not stop at nicknames. It grew into daily cruelty that chipped away at her confidence. Music, even some teachers failed to protect her, which made the loneliness worse. In those years, there was little awareness about mental health, and ignorance allowed bullying to become normal. The wrong diagnosis became a reason for others to treat her as less. The pain settled deep inside her and turned into anxiety that followed her into adulthood. Yet inside that shy girl was something: music, steady, a voice waiting to be heard. At home, there was music. Her father Patrick had worked as a coal miner and served during World War II, but he loved to sing. He performed at the Bishop's Blaze pub in their community, and Susan listened. Her mother, Bridget, worked as a shorthand typist and kept the family grounded in faith and Irish music, roots tied to County Donegal. The house was modest, but it carried music, strong values, and songs that floated through the rooms. Susan found comfort in those sounds. When she was 12 around 1973, she began singing at school and in her parish church choir. Teachers noticed her voice and encouraged her. Church became her safe place. Music became her way to breathe in a world that often felt tight around her. As she grew older, she did not stop. In the mid-1990s, she sought music formal training with vocal coach Fred O'Neill in Livingston. For nearly 6 years, they worked carefully on scales, breath control, music, and technique. He saw the strength in her mezzo-soprano voice and believed she could go far. Those sessions gave her discipline. They gave her structure. And even when her mother died in February 2007, after years of illness that Susan helped care for, the foundation of those lessons remained inside her. For a while after Bridget passed, Susan stopped music singing. Grief took over. She withdrew and felt there was nothing left to aim for. But slowly, the dream returned, tied closely to her mother's quiet encouragement. She tried many paths before the world knew her name. In 1995, at 34, she auditioned for Michael Barrymore's show, My Kind of People. She hoped this would be her moment. It was not. She was rejected. Years later, footage of that audition surfaced after she became famous, showing how close she had been, and yet how far she remained from success. In 1998, at 37, she used her savings to record a demo at Heartbeat Studio in Scotland. She sang Cry Me a River, Killing Me Softly, and Don't Cry for Me, Argentina. She mailed copies to record labels and television programs. No one responded. The silence was heavy. In 1999, she paid to include one track on a small charity CD with only a few hundred copies. By 2000, at 39, she felt defeated. She stayed in Blackburn, singing mostly for church and small local audiences, holding on to a dream that seemed to be fading. Then came 2008. Music. Susan was 47. Britain's Got Talent held auditions in Glasgow, and she applied with number 43212. She wanted to honor her mother, who had always believed in her. On April 11, 2009, she walked onto the stage at the Clyde Auditorium wearing a simple beige dress coat, facing thousands in the audience and millions who would later watch from home. When she said she wanted to be as successful as Elaine Paige, people laughed. The judges looked doubtful. Music. Simon Cowell folded his arms. Piers Morgan smirked. Amanda Holden raised her brows. The room expected failure. Then the music began. She sang, I Dreamed a Dream from Les Miserables. Within seconds, music, the laughter disappeared. Her voice filled the theater. It rose strong and clear, carrying years of pain and hope in every note. By the end of the performance, the crowd was on its feet. Piers called it the biggest yes he had ever given. Amanda admitted they had been cynical. Simon smiled in surprise. That single audition aired to 11 million viewers in the UK and changed everything. The clip exploded online. Within days, its music gathered tens of millions of views. By the end of 2009, it had passed Music 120 million, becoming one of the most watched videos of the year. In less than 48 hours, an unemployed church volunteer became a global name. She appeared on American television, including The Early Show and later Oprah. When her album I Dreamed a Dream was released on November 23, 2009, it sold 411 yuan 20 copies in its first week in the UK and 71,000 in the US. It topped charts and eventually sold around 10 million copies worldwide. She finished second on the show to dance group Diversity, but by then, the world already saw her as a winner. Yet fame brought pressure. During the live shows in May 2009, tabloids dug into her past and questioned her behavior. On May 27th, just days before the final, she snapped at reporters who pushed too hard. The stress built quietly. On May 31st, after losing the finale, she struggled to cope with the sudden weight of it all. She was admitted to the Priory Clinic in London for exhaustion and anxiety. She stayed for several days and then returned home to rest. Even leaders like Prime Minister Gordon Brown wished her well. Simon Cowell offered support and space away from the noise. But the noise did not stop. Paparazzi camped outside her small bungalow in Blackburn. Crowds gathered. Tabloids printed daily stories about her looks, her habits, music, her private life. She had lived quietly for decades, and now her world felt exposed and overwhelming. Still, she signed a deal, released music, and music stood on stages across the globe. The same girl who had once been called Simple now had 3 #1 albums within 2 years. Susan Boyle's rise did not slow down after that first moment on stage. It felt as if everything that happened next kept building on the last surprise, and the world kept watching to see what she would do. It all began on April 11th, 2009, when the 47-year-old church volunteer from Scotland walked onto the stage of Britain's Got Talent and sang I Dreamed a Dream. The clip spread everywhere. By the end of that year, more than 500 million people had watched it online, and the quiet woman from Blackburn had turned into a name the whole world knew. Only 7 months later, on November 17, 2009, her album I Dreamed a Dream came out, Music, and what followed shocked even the people who believed in her. The album went straight to #1 on the Billboard 200 and sold 71,000 copies in the first week. That was more than any other release in the United States that year. Even Eminem's album had sold less in its opening week. Susan was already 48 at the time and turned 49 soon after, which made the achievement even more surprising. She became the oldest artist ever to reach #1 in both the United States and the Music United Kingdom with a debut album, a record later confirmed by Music Guinness World Records. The numbers kept rising in ways no one expected. By January 2010, the album had sold 4 million copies in the United States Music and earned 4 times platinum status. In the United Kingdom, Music reached more than 2 million sales and went 7 times platinum. And in Australia, it later reached 10 times platinum. Across 41 countries, the album sold 8.601 million copies, turning a woman once laughed at on stage into one of the biggest music stories of a century. What began with one nervous audition had become a global wave that carried her everywhere. Her age made the success even harder for the music industry to explain. Susan Boyle was born on April 1, 1961, and she was already close to 50 when the album arrived. Before her, no debut artist in that era had reached #1 at such music and age. Some people had doubted her even before the audition, calling her unrealistic and music out of touch. Yet, the sales told a different story. In the United States, her first week numbers became the highest opening ever for a new solo female artist. And in the United Kingdom, the album set the record for the biggest first week sales for a debut release. Within months, she had earned millions, moving from a life on welfare to sudden wealth, in a way that felt almost unreal. The success did not fade after that first album. In November 2010, she released her second album, The Gift, and once again, it entered the Billboard chart at #1. It sold more than 300,000 copies in the first week, and even increased in the second week, something that rarely happened. The album stayed at #1 for 5 weeks, and sold more than 3 million copies worldwide. A year later, Someone to Watch Over Me followed, and reached #1 in the United Kingdom again, extending her streak of chart-topping albums. By the time she released Standing Ovation, her place in the music world felt secure, and the woman who once struggled to be heard had become a steady presence on the charts. Over the years, the numbers kept growing. By 2021, she had sold around 25 million records across 7 studio albums. Her first album remained the biggest, followed by The Gift and Someone to Watch Over Me. And together, they formed the core of a career that few people had imagined. In 2009, she received Grammy nominations in 2011 and 2012 and collected awards in Japan and Scotland, even though she never won a Grammy. The success came with its own pressure, though. A stroke in 2022 forced her to cancel performances, and later she spoke about being overworked during the busiest years. Still, the story that began with one audition kept reaching new chapters, and her voice continued to carry the memory of that first moment. Years later, another turning point arrived that explained much of her past. Music in December 2013, when Susan was 52, she revealed that she had Asperger's syndrome. For most of her life, doctors had told her that she had brain damage caused by a difficult birth. Music, and that label followed her through childhood and into adulthood. At school, she was bullied and called names, and teachers treated her as if she would never catch up. She grew up feeling different and often stayed alone, especially in Blackburn, where she later lived while caring for her mother, Bridget, until her death in 2007. The truth only came out after she decided music to seek help on her own. In late 2012, she visited a specialist because she feared that something more serious might be wrong. On December 7th, she went through simple tests music that measured her behavior and intelligence, and the results surprised even her. The tests showed she had an above-average IQ, which directly contradicted everything she had been told as a child. The doctor explained that many of her struggles came from autism traits, such as difficulty reading social signals, music anxiety and crowds, and emotional overload during stressful moments. When she spoke about the diagnosis in an interview on December 8, 2013, she sounded relieved. She said the old diagnosis had always felt unfair and that she finally understood herself better. The new understanding helped explain the moments people had once seen as strange, including her quiet pauses, nervous laughter, and sudden withdrawals after becoming famous. With the help of a support team, she learned to manage the pressures that had once overwhelmed her. Looking back, the diagnosis also explained what happened during Britain's Music Got Talent in 2009. The sudden fame brought constant attention, music, and endless rehearsals, and the pressure became too much. After the final in June, she struggled with exhaustion and anxiety. And on June 21st, she was taken to a clinic in London after behaving in a confused and distressed way. At the time, many people did not understand what was happening. But years later, the explanation felt clear. The crowds, the noise, and the constant changes had pushed her beyond her limits. The diagnosis did not change her path, but it gave meaning to the journey. She had spent years caring for her mother and singing quietly in local places. And after fame arrived, she kept reminding herself of a promise she once made to do something meaningful with her life. The understanding of her condition helped others see her in a new light, not as someone broken, but as someone different who had still reached extraordinary heights. Yet, even with all the success, there were parts of life that never turned out the way she hoped. Susan Boyle has often said that not having children is her deepest regret. She always loved being around children and imagined having a family of her own. But the years passed without that happening. She cared for her mother until her death in March 2007 and stayed close to her family. Yet the idea of motherhood remained something she never reached. At one point, she hoped to become a foster parent. She spoke about having a large house with space to share and believed she could give children a safe home. Authorities did not approve the music plan, partly because of concerns about her condition and the pressure of fame, and the decision left her disappointed. Even later, she spoke about the regret that never quite went away. Romance rarely lasted long in her life. In 2014, while touring in the United States, she met a doctor during a stay in Florida. They had dinner together, and she described him as kind and respectful. And for a short time, she hoped the connection might grow. Plans were mentioned about music visits to Scotland, but nothing came of them and the relationship quietly faded. It remained the only public romance she ever spoke about. As the years went on, rumors often appeared about secret marriages or relationships. Yet, none of them were true. She remained single and focused on her music and her health, especially after the stroke she suffered in 2022. Even when stories spread online about weddings or pregnancies, she continued living the same quiet life she had always known. Despite earning millions, she never moved far from her beginnings. She still kept her childhood house in Blackburn, a modest place filled with memories of the family she grew up with. She bought a larger home after becoming famous. Yet, she returned again and again to the small house because it felt like home. The rooms carried the past with them, and she often said that the history of the place mattered more than comfort. Susan Boyle's life changed in a single night in April 2022. On the evening of April 30th, she felt completely normal and nothing seemed wrong at all. But by the next morning, everything had fallen apart. Her manager, Geraldine, found her with one side of her face hanging low, her speech broken into sounds that were hard to understand, and her whole left side too weak to move properly. She could barely talk, and she could not sing even a single note. The stroke had struck without warning, and doctors quickly realized how serious it was because the damage had reached the muscles that controlled her face and voice. The same voice that had sold millions of albums and touched people across the world suddenly felt like it might disappear forever. Susan was 60 years old and lying in a hospital bed, trying to understand what had just happened to her life. Singing had always been the center of everything she knew, and without it, she felt lost and frightened. She had spent years fighting through bullying and cruel jokes about her music appearance. And, as a child, she had even been wrongly told she had brain damage after oxygen problems at birth. Now she faced another battle, and this time she could not even say her own name clearly. Doctors warned that permanent damage was possible if treatment did not work fast enough, and the fear of losing her voice became almost unbearable. Still, even in those early days, she refused to give up, and within days she had already started rehabilitation because she believed that if a stroke had taken something from her, then she would fight to take it back. The news from doctors felt crushing as they explained how severe the damage really was. Her left side was weak and stiff. Her face would not move properly, and her vocal cords barely responded at all. Specialists told her she might never record or perform again. And for someone whose life had been built around music, the thought felt devastating. She had sold millions of albums after her sudden rise to fame, and that success had given her purpose and stability. Yet now, even simple words like hello would not come out right. Tests showed that the muscles had already begun to weaken, and recovery music odds for cases like hers were low. Memories of past struggles returned to her while she lay in that hospital room, including the years when people misunderstood her condition and the time she music collapsed from exhaustion soon after becoming famous. Losing the ability to perform also meant losing the steady income she depended on. And after her last tour ended in early 2020, the future already felt uncertain. Instead of letting fear win, she decided music to fight harder than ever. Soon after leaving the hospital in May 2022, she hired a private speech therapist and began attending sessions 4 times a week. The work did not stop when she went home because she practiced every single day for more than a year. Vocal coaches pushed her through long exercises that sometimes lasted 5 hours a day, teaching her how to control muscles that once moved without effort.